Hello, friends. Welcome to episode 1276 of the Locked On Hawks podcast. I am your host, Brad Rowland. It's Summer League week. The NBA is, of course, ramping up. There have already been games happening in San Francisco and Salt Lake City. The Hawks do not open in Las Vegas until Saturday, but with all kinds of attention paid on the young guys at this point in time, it's time to air my interview that I recorded with Brian Geisinger about AJ Griffin. Of course, the Hawks acquired Griffin via the draft, mid-first round pick. A very exciting selection, in my opinion, as we'll get into on this podcast. I know I praised that pick. It was a great value for the Hawks, and I touched on that already, but more on that obviously here. And Brian covered AJ Griffin extensively at Duke, as Brian writes for ACC Sports and does other podcasting ventures about the Charlotte Hornets, has a great idea about that basketball in that region. So a great source there. This is an entire podcast basically on AJ Griffin, his future, obviously a little bit helpful for a summer league preview of what to watch for as well, but what he does well, what he does a little bit less well at this point in time. In fact, he's still 18 years old. The future is very bright there, but I wanted to have a deep dive, sort of solo-ish podcast about Griffin, and Brian, perfect person to come on the podcast to help me with that venture. So I, just as a plug before we get to the actual podcast itself, I've been wall-to-wall covering everything happening with the Hawks, dating back to the draft, the DeJounte Murray trade rumors up and down the board, Kevin Huerter going to Sacramento, the latest stuff from previewing Summer League. I talked about, wire to wire everything, basically. Free agency, the way the Hawks have overhauled their roster, the latest news and notes, etc. All that is still available on the podcast feed. Please subscribe to the show on your platform of choice, whether that be Apple Podcasts or Spotify, Stitcher, and of course on video on YouTube. Also follow the show on Twitter at BT Rowland for me, and then at Locked On Hawks for the show itself. And with all that said, we'll have the intro, and then I'll be back with Brian Geisinger on AJ Griffin.
You are Locked On Hawks, your daily Atlanta Hawks podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
I am joined now by an expert on AJ Griffin and all things ACC basketball. Brian Geisinger is here. I appreciate you coming on, sir. This is the first time appearance, and I thought, honestly, you were the first person that I thought of, which maybe is a credit to you. Maybe it's my own mania, but I knew you covered the ACC quite closely. You've written about AJ Griffin a lot, so I appreciate you coming on and talking about him, and hope all is well with you on this fine Monday.
Yeah, not doing too bad, all things considered. Thank you for having me. And yeah, not only am I always down to talk draft, talk basketball, but I'm always here for AJ Griffin discussions. So thank you for having me on today.
Yeah, so I said a little bit there, but I'll let you kind of talk about how you have been keeping a close eye on AJ Griffin. Obviously, I covered the draft, but I was not on the AJ Griffin beat necessarily. I watched him as a prospect because he's been a prominent prospect for a long time, as I know you know, and also played at Duke, which is not exactly like he's a hidden gem in this process. He's playing on Duke, but you have a very close eye on him in particular. So I want to give us some background on how you've been watching him and sort of what your beat has been and keeping a close eye on him.
Yeah, he committed to Duke fairly early in the process. I remember writing the AJ Griffin commitment story. And that was at a time of his high school career where he was obviously missing a lot of time due to injury, but he had shown both at the high school level and on some of the, USA basketball, junior programs, had really shown himself to be a pretty special shooting prospect. I don't think I was quite ready for what I saw at Duke, and we can get into that, more. I'm sure here. But this season was interesting because after the 2020-2021 season, which pretty was covering the league, but was a little bit more removed just because of it being the first full season during the pandemic, and this year was able to be back in Cameron, was there for all but a couple of home games, and so covered this team up close and watched every game at least once, if not multiple times. And again, was in person for a lot of those games. Could not wait to see AJ play, along with Paolo Banchero, and Trevor Keels to an extent as well, but was really thrilled to see Banchero and Griffin. And then it was, probably about a month before the season started, AJ had another knee injury during a practice, like early to mid-October. Yeah. And when that happened, Duke was pretty tight-lipped about the timetable, the severity, all of that sort of stuff. And I remember thinking like, I hope he's okay because I know this guy's special and you just want him to be good. But selfishly, you're also like, I'd like to see him play at Duke too. Like I've been looking forward to this. So I hope he can get back out there at a healthy, timely fashion. And I remember they played early in the season. They played a scrimmage up in DC against Villanova. And AJ did not play in the scrimmage. It was, a week or so, a couple of weeks after the injury. And so just before the season was going to start. And you could see, again, there was very little video that came out of the scrimmage that was publicly available. But Duke put out some stuff. And you could see they were playing at the Wizards practice facility. You could see in a couple of the shots on the second court, so where the scrimmage wasn't taking place, there was some very muscular guy in a 21 jersey on the far end going through drills. And Coach K talked about how quickly his body had responded well. He had worked his ass off to get through the treatment process. And so when I went to see them play the exhibition game against Winston-Salem State, he was out there. But sort of similar to he was for much of the first month of the season, didn't physically look quite right. Could kind of get into a stance, but couldn't really move that well laterally. Didn't seem to have the kind of vertical pop that you were expecting to see, and was really kind of just being used as a rotation guy to back up Banchero, was essentially just the backup forward for Duke. And then after, there were certainly some flashes. I think about the Lafayette game and the Gardner-Webb game where he played 40 minutes combined in those two games. And he had a couple wow plays. And there was even in the Gardner-Webb game, there was a transition possession where he went late in the game. Duke was up by, 40 points or whatever. He went flying down the right side. And I can't remember who put the ball. Maybe it was Jalen Blakes or Jeremy Roach, but someone tried to throw him 2/3 of the quarter court lob.
Yeah.
And he took off. It was they did not complete the I don't think he even caught the ball. But his ability to get off the ground for that made everyone in Cameron kind of look to the person next to them and say, "Whoa!" Hadn't seen him go flying through the air like that. But really, it was a couple weeks later, or maybe even a month later, once they got back from the post, after the Ohio State loss, and the calendar flipped to December, and all of a sudden, he's didn't look fully comfortable, but started to look more and more comfortable out there. And immediately you could start to see the 3-point shooting touch, which is special, both for this draft class and maybe even historically. Just the shooting touch this guy has is special. One of the softest shots you'll ever see. It would feel like when you're at those games at Cameron, almost like the ball was just falling in from the rafters, right into the just this incredibly soft, high arcing shot. So. And then then the game was just on after that. For the rest of the season, he was incredible. It was a coin flip every time he shot a three, whether it was going to go in or not. And then you could start to see some more of the flashes, and we can get into some more of that stuff, I'm sure. But really enjoyed covering him up close this season. Really, really fun, nice, charismatic guy who everyone was pulling for in and around the program. And to see him, land in what I think is a really good situation in Atlanta, it's obviously to get a guy this talented at 16 is big for the Hawks. But I thought of this dude getting to play next to Trae Young is, whenever the time comes for him to, be one of the rotation wings for this roster is super exciting. So. We'll miss AJ in the ACC this next season, but cannot wait to see him in the NBA.
Today's show is brought to you by Arcade 1-Up. We have big news right now. The one and only NBA Jam is back in our lives, and Arcade 1-Up is the leader in at-home retro arcade games, and they're not only bringing NBA Jam back as the best game ever, they made it bigger than ever with a Shaq Edition machine. I've been a big NBA Jam guy for a long time, and it's really fantastic to have this back in my life, and I know it will be for a lot of my diehard friends out there. obsessed with the game as well. And I'm thrilled to tell you, you can once again play hoops with NBA Legends in this arcade classic. You can jump across the court, it's all on fire, one of the first sports games ever to feature real digitized NBA licensed teams, no free throws, and no quarters required. And you can play against your family and friends with new Wi-Fi leaderboards, making you more connected than ever. And you can pre-order right now. Yes, right now for a pre-order at arcade1up.com. That is arcade, the number one, up.com for an estimated early September ship date. Arcade 1UP is the place for fun. They have classics like Golden Tee, Mortal Kombat, and many others. And listen up closely now because they're giving away an NBA JAM Shaq edition to a Locked On listener. Enter for a chance to win a game console for your house or you want it, honestly, at arcade.com/lockedon. That is arcade, the number one, up.com/lockedon. You have until July 8th, so not much more time to get on this and enter to win the NBA JAM Shaq edition console. One more time, enter today at arcade1up.com/lockedon. So you mentioned sort of the explosion that he showed in that moment you were referencing. And, I did get a chance to see him a couple times at lower levels. And of course, he's kind of famously had like a 2-year span where he didn't play very much because he was banged up. And then you mentioned as well, like he kind of had this weird false start to this season where it seemed like he might be out for a while. And then he ended up playing really the entire season. I mean, I'm not going to ask you to be his doctor, but what do you make of like the rumblings that he may not, have the most, cleanest health record? Obviously, a couple of injuries already on his record. Obviously the Hawks took him, so they're not terribly worried about it. They got a question about that, and they kind of said, clean bill of health as far as they're concerned. But do you worry at all about his health long term? And also, like, I know you would have seen him earlier in his career. Like he seemingly didn't quite have the same burst all the time last season at Duke as he did earlier. What do you make of that as well, sort of in conjunction with not only injuries, but also just getting that same burst back that he had earlier on? Yeah,
it does seem like that is. I mean, look, he's also remarkably young, for a lottery prospect. And
still 18 right now.
Yeah. Still 18. So like, by no means a finished product. And look, he's going to have to, assuming, the body holds up and is healthy. There are some, he's not a finished product, and there are some things he's going to have to do to try to become more explosive with his drives. Like obviously he has the shot to force hard closeouts, but it's the stuff that he's going to have to work on, perhaps as a driver or being, an on-ball defender. I do worry a little bit at times about like sort of the lateral quickness. Look, yes, the vertical pop maybe was inconsistent this season, but and certainly something that he was only really able to show if he had like a bit of a runway, and kind of a clear path, like not something he could really just sort of pull out of nowhere if there's traffic in front of him. I am, and this is like a personal thing, I am someone who worries a lot, and I am trying to get better about not assuming the worst case scenario is going to happen at all times. It's something I'm working on. So I think I'll be uneasy watching AJ to an extent. Like there were times this season where it would leave my mind. He'd float around and hit 6 threes in the game, and you're not thinking like, oh, I wonder how the knee's holding up. You know what I mean? You're just thinking, oh my God, look at this guy. And then there were other times where, he'd try to drive the ball and couldn't get into a gap and would sputter a little bit, or he'd fall going for a rebound, and you would just hold your breath thinking like, God, I hope he can, and inevitably he'd get up and get back down on defense, or whatever. So he seemed pretty resilient. I do think it's like reason for concern. I think it's also why he wasn't like a top 5 pick in the draft or a top 6 pick or 7 pick or whatever. Like there is a reason why he fell to the Hawks at 16. So certainly something to be worried about. But I think for a team like Atlanta that can kind of take chances as far as trying to find, stuff to put in the toolbox around Trey, it's absolutely a worthwhile risk. You know what I mean? Because this guy is a special shooter, and a guy that I think has some sort of like superstar potential if he's healthy. And so, if you're drafting at 16, I think that's like an incredible, yes, you're willing to take that risk, even if the medicals are a little disconcerting.
Yeah, and that's kind of exactly where I am too. Obviously we don't have access to the medical information. You can kind of only go on what you hear. And, they got the question, Landry Fields did, when they introduced him. And, he seemed to be, at least the Hawks like the medicals enough so they weren't worried about it. And listen, you kind of said it, but like he fell that far. You got to just take the guy, and the upside is what it is. We'll sort of go through why that is and what the appeal is. But we definitely agree in terms of like at 16 with his, even if, for me, this is sort of a simplified way to look at it. But even if he is just the shooter he was at the college level, he can return value at 16. Even just with that and like a little bit better defense than he played, obviously at the college level too. But if you believe in what you saw earlier at the lower levels when he was the number one guy in their class, there's obviously even room beyond that. So I do want to get into some of the stuff that he does. Obviously, the shooting is the headliner. We kind of referenced it, but truly some ridiculous shooting numbers at the college level. I can go through them all, but I won't. Even the synergy stats were basically 90th percentile plus. 3-point shooting stats, same thing. The stroke is really, really pure. Obviously, there's been a lot of questions about like his wide base and kind of not odd shooting form, but not necessarily prototypical all the way through. Is he going to be a truly elite shooter in your mind? What do you actually make of his shooting at the NBA level? Because on paper, the numbers are quite obviously awesome.
Yeah, I think he has the ability to be, because of that shot to the touch he has, which is just it's really, really special. So I talked about sort of like the sweetness and the softness of the shot. But I also think his ability to and I know even we talk about the base a lot and perhaps why he has that type of a wide base to generate the power to get the ball to the rim, or maybe it was something that he developed while recovering from some of these lower body injuries he's had over time. But you can talk about the release point a little bit. Like he does some weird stuff with his hands, but it almost doesn't matter because he shoots it with such good touch, with such accuracy, and I think the load time is pretty quick too. So even and he's got a high release, and he's got long arms to get the snap and get the ball off too. So I think all of that stuff checks out to be really, really good. I think he has the ability to take bad passes and turn them into clean catch and shoots too. Like this is not someone that needs to be stationary and wide open and have the ball get thrown right into his abdomen or right into the shooting pocket for it to turn into a catch and shoot three. Like he can make tough catches and quickly get into his motion and get the ball up there. And once it does, I mean, it's 40 whatever percent of the time it's going in. You mentioned his ability to you mentioned the synergy numbers. They're just ridiculous. Like one of the top spot up players in the country. And I think a big part of the spot up ability of him, again, he's not just stationary. He is a relocation artist, in my opinion. I think he has a really nice sense of when to slide up or shake up along the perimeter and get into like the vision passing cone of whomever has the basketball. Like he and Paolo Banchero had chemistry on that, like basically December through the end of the year. They were so good at, okay, Paolo's at the right elbow. He's going to drive left and spin right. I'm, strong side corner. But when my guy comes to dig to help up, I'm going to slide to my left. I'm going to get right. And then all of a sudden it's going to be a much easier kick out pass for Paolo Banchero. I think there were other times this year you saw him. He was stationed deep in the corner. Like let's say Duke's running a horn set. They've got two at the elbows. They've got two in the corners. Wendell Moore Jr.'s got the ball up top. And Griffin's one of the guys in the corners. Well, if the initial ball screen drive goes baseline and it's headed in his direction, he's also really good at moving from out of the corner up further up the wing, right? So all of a sudden now he's his man has lost track of him. He's created a passing window, and all of a sudden he's created an open catch and shoot look. But he's so good as like the wing shooter working alongside pick and roll. So the ball screen happens, and if there's any rotation whatsoever, where let's say the defense has two on the ball or is playing to the level, and Mark Williams is screening and diving. If AJ's guy leaves him to go tag, he's not going to just stand there. Like he's gonna slide right, he'll slide left, he'll get into the slot, and then all of a sudden he's open for a clean catch and shoot shot. And I think this is also where you can kind of tap into the shooting range with Griffin. Like he has big time shooting range off the catch and off those step back hang dribble moves that he likes to make. And so he just makes those closeouts be that much tougher, right? They've got to cover that much more ground. They're that much less likely to contest his shot or bother his shot because they don't have the amount of time to close down that much space. So I just think he makes those like second rotations and closeouts when he's like, weak side or shaking up from the corner on pick and roll. He just makes them really, really, really tough. And just, I don't know, man, the thought of that skill next to Trae Young.
Yeah,
Trae Young, Okongwu pick and roll, or Trae Young, Capella pick and roll is just like, yeah, good luck for dealing with that. That is like one of the other things too. It's like, I think AJ Griffin is like a special shooter. You could put him on Mars with me as his point guard, and he'd be a good shooter. But the thought of him getting to do it, with Trae, just the ultimate pick and roll weapon and decision maker, is incredible. And I think he also has these nice little tricks that he adds to the end of these relocation efforts. The shot fake followed by a sidestep dribble. He'll stay in the corner, ditch the initial contest, and then shoot the corner three. I just think his like footwork in those areas, even with the wide base, is really, really tight. Like he has a good sense of sticking behind the line, or if he used the shot fake in the first dribble to, and all of a sudden he's a step inside the line, then he'll use the step back or the hang dribble to get back beyond the arc. So I think that all of that stuff is like really, really good. I think the thing that will make him like truly like an elite shooter, and maybe we can get into some more of the creation stuff, but is like the pin down screen usage. I think this is where I worry a little bit about the shot base, because it is so wide, assuming that's something maybe he cleans it up and gets that process, airtight. But I do worry about that from like a process standpoint in terms of kind of like rapid fire, quick time movement shooting. Now, I watched someone like Terry Rozier for the Hornets, and he's incredible at staying on balance, or if he gets off balance coming off a screen, quickly getting back into his shot form and getting it up. And that's something that like, AJ didn't get a ton of movement sets at Duke. They would occasionally run floppy for him, like the Hawks run for Herter and Bogdanovich all the time. And, some throwback action, the elevator doors plays, like some empty side handoff actions with Banchero. So he has some of that. And I think he does a nice job kind of reading defenders. Like if you put a wing and chase around the screen, he'll curl. If you try to cheat on the screen and shoot the gap, he'll fade and get to his shot. Put a big guy on him and he can catch and then kind of get into his bag a little bit and try to get to the step back three, or and he's even can give you a little bit of mid-range scoring too, which I think is something that he may have the ability to do at some point in his career, is be a guy that can give you some pull-up three-point shooting and some mid-range shooting. But yeah, like I just think because of the touch and because the stats are just so good and have been since even before he got to Duke, that you can buy this guy as potentially, assuming everything holds up physically, as a guy that the versatility, the movement shooting, the intelligence, relocating, and then some of the counters he has off of that. Yes, I think he has the chance to really do damage from distance in the NBA.
Today's show is brought to you by BetOnline. As I record this, the NBA madness always is continuing at this point. Free agency is ongoing, of course. Summer League is in the future, very near future. Actually, I'm already on the ground to cover it, and futures projections are already flying around across the basketball world. With that in mind, BetOnline is a place to fire away on the futures market, as well as anything else in the sports world that you're looking for. They are the number one source for all your betting needs and information, both in the future and always. Find all the latest odds, news, and developments in the sports world. That includes MLB odds and scores, the latest fight stuff, and even next season's futures on the NBA, college basketball, NFL, college football, hockey, soccer, and more. BetOnline is extension source for the wagering avenues like live betting and esports, and they have poker as well, casino games, and much more beyond that. And BetOnline has you covered for other sports. Hockey when they're in season, that includes golf and tennis, auto racing, rugby, lacrosse, table tennis, horse racing, auto racing, soccer, cricket, entertainment bets, and any sport you could possibly think of. Head to BetOnline right now today on your computer or mobile device to learn more about all the trends and the action across the sports world and beyond, where the game starts. I'm glad you mentioned the Trae aspect too, because clearly, on one hand, I know Hawks fans are like conditioned now to be looking for a secondary creator, which is not necessarily what Griffin is supposed to be right now. Like he could maybe do a little bit of that down the line, but he's more of that like perfect secondary guy with Trae in terms of like moving off the ball and being that shooter that the Hawks kind of already have in some respects with a guy like Bogdanovich, for example. Mm-hmm. But yeah. Griffin's 18 years old and a guy who has, sky high upside, et cetera, in that role. Like also, in addition, I think you sort of got into it later on there about his potential mid-range game, but he had great numbers as a cutter in college. Mm-hmm. Didn't do a whole lot in pick and roll as a ball handler. I'm not sure how much that's part of his game. Maybe you can elaborate on that a little bit. But like, I mean, again, like kind of quote unquote worst case scenario. Like if he's just like a super dynamic off ball player with his shooting gravity, that is not necessarily what everybody's like looking for for the Hawks right now, because they kind of already have it. But at the same time, this is a long-term play, and as you well know, you're never drafting a guy for his rookie season. You're drafting a guy for 2, 3, 4 years from now. And at age 22, that player would be pretty appetizing next to Trae Young that you just described.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, really didn't get a lot of like pick and roll possessions at Duke, and look, they had
a lot of malice to feed at Duke. I was going to say.
Yeah, a lot, and like I mean, it's like it's obviously it's a blessing, but it can move everyone down the pecking order a little bit when your power forward is Banchero, right? It's like you want the ball in this dude's hands every time. You're right, and obviously, look, Paolo got to run a ton of the occasional inverted pick and roll, but a lot of like 4 or 5 pick and roll with Mark Williams and Theo John this season. And look, Wendell Moore Jr., Trevor Keels, Jeremy Roach, like all these guys that played with the basketball a lot in the pick and roll. And so the only time you really got to see Griffin doing anything sort of like simulating more of a pick and roll was some of the handoff stuff they would go to with him, with Griffin or pardon me, with Banchero or Williams. And I think he showed, at least as like a shot creator, he showed the ability. He showed like pretty good patience. Like he's not a guy that like gets sped up and gets into a hurry. Like because of the high release, because of the shooting touch, and he was obviously often he was dealing with somewhat of an advantage in terms of size. He's so strong and he's so powerfully built in his upper body that he does have the ability to kind of just like get over guys and get the shot up. So I don't think it's going to be a while from now before he's the guy that you would ever really give him the ball and tell him to run, but more than a couple of pick and rolls per game or something like that. But I do think he showed, again, mostly just from like a shot creation standpoint, not really making plays for others, but the ability to be patient, get to either, get to the step back or spin and get to that lean in the float, the runner or the floater in the short mid range, or the fadeaway jumper in the long mid range. Like he's got some of that stuff in his bag. So I think there is some secondary creation to him. Like he's not just a pure, catch and shoot guy or a pure movement guy or whatever. He can do some stuff with the basketball. And there were even flashes of him putting together combo moves and, hesitation crossover to get downhill, then a spin move to get back to his right. Like there wasn't a ton of it, but there were definitely flashes this season with him. So, and then you mentioned the cutting too. I think that's actually like a really underrated part of his game. Griffin moves really well without the basketball. The vertical cuts, cutting in from the slot, cutting along the baseline. That was how he got the majority of his dunks this season. Were off-ball cuts and him just finding pockets of space to get into. So, is someone that is going to bend and distort defenses or tilt defenses, even when he doesn't have the ball, because of the shot and because of his movement, and that he's tireless in pursuing those efforts.
Yeah, no, it makes a ton of sense to me, and I'm kind of fascinated by what he can be, just beyond the shooting. Because clearly, the shooting is the number one appeal. That's why we started there. That's his number one calling card right now. But he has other traits. He moves well, especially the relocation stuff and the cutting, and it's pretty enticing for me. And listen, anything with him with the ball in his hands as like a pick and roll operator is a secondary thing that's like kind of a bonus. There might be some stuff in there. I mean, obviously he used to be more of the number one guy coming, in high school before he got hurt and all that stuff. Maybe that's a little bit untapped potential in there. And obviously it's a lot of physical tools. By the way, he's just enormous. Like seeing him at the intro press conference on Monday, it's sort of a reminder of that. This guy's just jacked. I mean, I don't know what he weighs, but he is not a small man. He's 6'6", like 6'11" wingspan.
Yeah.
And like 220, 230. I mean, he's that helps too in terms of just like being NBA ready.
The first Duke game I went to, this I mentioned it a little bit ago, but it was an exhibition game last October, and he got in. No one knew for sure he was going to play, like media wise, knew he was going to play that day. He got in, I think, in the first half, and on the first defensive possession, he got into the defensive stance, and he has tree trunks for legs, like physically. Assuming everything holds up because of his the wingspan and the frame that's able to pack on that much muscle at age 18, like he again could have a body that's really really ready to play in the NBA, but just assuming the knees and stuff are ready to hold up. But physically, the profile is pretty impressive in terms of wingspan and strength.
Yeah, and the last thing I want to make sure I mention out loud about his offense is that he didn't turn the ball over hardly at all at Duke, which is something that's maybe something that you might expect for more of a low usage guy because he did have a much lower usage than most guys of his profile as a if high school All-American top potential lottery pick kind of guy. But part of that is what we talked about earlier with all the mouths to feed at Duke. But 7% turnover rate is like super duper low. What do you make of his passing? Like, do you think there's much there in terms of like, when he's not able to just fire off or, use his cutting and use his 3-point shooting? Is he just like an adequate passer for an NBA wing in your mind? Is there room to grow there too?
Yeah, I think I would say adequate passer in terms of like ball mover, you know what I mean? But nothing, over manipulative or certainly what we saw at Duke. And look, that's maybe a part of his game that like is maybe along with the defense is maybe lagging behind a little bit, just like, missed out on parts of his development and then ended up at Duke, which I think was a really good situation for him in a lot of ways. And he certainly happily bought into the role that Duke gave him. But we just talked about the lack of like pick and roll possessions for him. You know what I mean? But I think he is a guy that can be a ball mover. I think he has the ability to, if he gets a hard closeout, to put the ball on the deck, force a rotation, and then, kick it out to the opposite wing. So simple stuff like that to kind of just like keep the advantage going is something that I think he can do. But beyond that, everything else he'd be leveraging sort of like his scoring gravity for, and trying to play off of that. But just didn't see a ton of it this season at Duke.
And that makes sense. I mean, that's not a huge deal. I think they probably know that as well. And I want to transition to the defense a little bit, just because one of the takeaways I've heard for people is like maybe it's the product of him not playing a lot of basketball in the last 3 years, but like the processing is a little bit slow at times for him right now in terms of like feeling the game on both ends of the floor, and a lot of that's on defense, but maybe that's also the passing acumen too. But defensively, I think it was not great all the time at Duke. I do wonder what he could be because he does have the physical tools, the stoutness, like he's a good enough athlete to where he should be totally fine. But generally speaking, what did you make of his defense? And also, like, what kind of positional role do you think he should have in the NBA? Because I think at the most, at least for right now, he seems like he's not going to be a stopper defensively, but like he does have like the sort of the physical size to maybe guard fours in the future. Like the versatility aspect could be pretty important there for him.
Yeah, agreed. Yeah, because he has the strength and the weight, he should be a guy that, in theory, should be able to hang on and guard a bunch of different position types. Especially because like, how many fours are like, real post up, threats in the NBA now, or guys that you're really worried about getting on the offensive glass? I mean, there certainly are, guys, but a lot of guys that are going to play those roles are, they're spot up shooters or spacers or stretch guys or whatever. And I mean, AJ can certainly hang there. I think there's like a willingness and an ability for him to get into a stance. It is something where he looks very impressive when he gets into a stance, because the wingspan, the muscles, the lower body strength, like you look at it and you're like, man, this guy should be a fire hydrant to try to get around. But I think it's the first, like you see the lack of explosion at times with him driving the basketball. And I sometimes feel like I see that when he's at the point of attack, guarding against like the first step, the first dribble, like laterally guys are able, especially if they're smaller and twitchier, like they're able to just kind of get around him. And he doesn't have sort of like the I don't know, at times maybe like the confidence in his body to really like fight through a screen or to fight over the top. And so I don't know, some of those things where it was tough to know, is this physical or is this like a mental thing? I do think like the struggles with lateral quickness are real and something to be worried about a little bit. It's not like he was a complete sieve, but it was an issue at times at Duke this season. I think there were also moments where, he would look good if he was matched up against sort of like maybe like a talented, but perhaps even like a bulkier creator. Like there was one, like when they played Wake in Durham, I was at the game, and like he had a couple possessions on Jake LaRavia, who, 19th overall pick by Memphis, where he did a beautiful job fighting over the top of a screen for LaRavia, contested forced LaRavia into a really tough runner. But then there was another time, a week or two after that, where they were playing NC State. He's on Darion Sebron, and Sebron goes left, crosses right, and just races by. AJ Griffin, Mark Williams comes over and blocks the shot, and then there's a putback dunk. So the breakdown is all on AJ there. So he's got a ways to go. Like he's probably a little bit behind there.
Yeah.
But again, he's still just 18 years old.
Yeah, no, I mean, that's part of it too. And I feel like, the off-ball stuff, I think he feels the game reasonably well. He'll figure it out long term. And that's especially the off-ball stuff is like less of a concern for me right now because of the age, because of how little he's played. The actual concerns for me defensively are just like kind of what you mentioned a second ago, like him trying to deal with smaller guys or trying to deal with guys off the screens. I did not like the screen navigation aspect of him much. And part of that's technique stuff too, but he's not the quickest guy right now. That's part of it too. And that's one of the overarching questions of the event, the entire evaluation. A lot of it's on offense too, but like what's his ability to get quicker, get more explosive at the NBA level when he has, more basketball under his feet, also, NBA training, strength conditioning, all that stuff. Obviously not a guy who's going to be worried about getting bulkier like a lot of prospects are. He's already very stout, but in terms of like the quickness in a short area, being able to get around screens, be able to close out effectively and not like guys just blow by you by sort of closing out a little bit heavy footed is kind of what I'm at least thinking about my brain right now. So there's some concerns defensively. And honestly, I'm sure you know this, even though you're not covering the Hawks every day, the biggest concern with the Hawks is like, can you play a guy with Trae Young defensively? And they can't really afford to have huge negatives on the wing on defense. And that's perhaps my number one concern with Griffin. And even I love the pick, and I think you have to make that pick at that point as long as you're comfortable with the medicals. But if there's one basketball concern, it's probably the defense for me.
Yeah, I think so too. I understand sort of like the constraints of the roster around Trae. Like obviously he does so much for you offensively, but yeah, you're gonna want to be thinking about who are the guys that could be on the court with him in a playoff game, right? And right now, Griffin defensively probably isn't there. Like he probably would have a bit of a target on his back. We'll see where he is in a year from now, or 2 years from now. I also think some of the team defense, like some of the ball watching, like I think that stuff will get ironed out. Again, he's young, he's a wing. The more higher level basketball plays, he'll be there. I thought he had some kind of like nice flashes, rotating, being a helper at the rim, like the occasional, block that he would get on a putback or on a weak side contest or something like that. So I think there's a little bit of like untapped potential because of the wingspan and because of his feel for the game as a help defender. But yeah, obviously he'll have to iron out the mistakes there. And certainly like I completely understand the concerns with him navigating screens or trying to stay in front of the ball, especially if teams are willing to like go out of their way to target him. Like that's going to probably be a problem for him for whatever it's worth. And look, you probably have gotten a sense of this by covering him or maybe even hearing Atlanta's Brain Trust talk about him or hearing AJ at his press conference. He is absolutely a worker. I don't even think for this guy to even be here in this place that he is now, after the injuries he suffered pre-college, is pretty nuts, actually. To be physically as imposing as he is, to be this kind of special shooter with that kind of touch, I think speaks to someone that is pretty dedicated to this and willing to work. Again, you saw it at Duke with his ability to really like attack the rehab process, and I think it's something that he'll work hard at. Look, maybe he won't get there, but I think assuming like the body holds up physically, I think he's going to end up turning into like a solid rotation defender. Do you know what I mean? Like not a stopper, but yes, a guy, especially with that shot, who you're going to want on the court and is going to do like enough defensively. Even if Trae is the guy that's theoretically, guarding the weakest option perimeter assignment, the stationary shooter or whatever. But I think Griffin has the ability to take some tougher assignments defensively, but it's going to take a little bit of time. And I would want to mention this too, like, because we're discussing the defense, I think there are absolutely obvious reasons to go at the defense and to be concerned about it. I would say I touched about the team defense a little bit. There is, I think, an under-discussed kind of winning plays element to Griffin I think it goes a little bit under the radar. We talked about his movement as a cutter, and he'll just always move without the ball, even when the action is geared elsewhere, or if he knows he's not going to get a touch or whatever, he just moves without the ball. And again, given the shooting profile and all that sort of stuff, it forces defenses to stay tight with him, to track him, and forces rotations, etc. But defensively, the rebound numbers were okay, not great, like 13.5% defensive rebound rate. That's actually not too bad. Like,
it's fine. Yeah, it's totally okay.
It's fine, exactly. And look, I know, but to also be playing with Mark Williams and Paolo Banchero, and I know Banchero,
and that's part of why it's fine. Like,
yeah,
the context is what it is. Where like it's very easy to see he's playing with a bunch of 5-star prospect athletes and a lottery pick level center and the number 1 overall pick on the roster. So I think I'm not really concerned about that. Obviously the Hawks team probably a little bit of that as well, but I think that I don't know. And I'm a little always worried about that because the Hawks have had some guys, especially at the 3 in recent years, from your Torian Princes to even DeAndre Hunter now. They're not great rebounders, but I think that Griffin as a 3 even, and honestly, he might play some 2. I mean, that's the thing. Like, he's got great size, and I think he's probably a 3 long term, just because of what we talked about before defensively. Like, he's probably going to play a little bit better against guys who are bigger. But I mean, the versatility there is definitely appealing, and he's 18, but it's. I don't know. I don't want to keep repeating that phrase, but it really is worth remembering how young he is. And especially, look, I'm saying this for Hawks people, there's this rep out there that's earned with this coaching staff not loving rookies. And similarly to, Jalen Johnson a year ago, who I know you also covered closely, if he doesn't play much as a rookie, it'll be because of his defense, not because of his offense. And I think that is going to be frustrating, I'm sure, to a lot of people if that actually happens. But that's what takes longer. I think his offense should play right away, to be honest.
Yeah, totally. I mean, that shot, yes, it does play. It's again, special shooter. But I would say, like, while the defensive rebound numbers, they are what they are. They don't capture. I mean, this, and I'm sure a lot of listeners know this too. Like, something like defensive rebounding percentage or whatever, like, it doesn't tell anywhere close to the whole story as far as like what you are as a rebounder. Do you know what I mean? And I just thought there were once per game, maybe twice per game, you'd see him, get a long rebound or get a loose ball or back to do a tap pass to a teammate, which again, I think sort of speaks to his feel as a basketball player in general. And that it shows through in ways that go beyond just he cuts without the ball offensively. Like, there again, I think there's a winning play feel component to his game that flies under the radar because we talk about the shot, the injuries. You know what I mean? And I think there's actually a little bit more to his game than just a spot up shooter. You know what I mean? I think the winning plays component of him is something that it's not really a big part of his profile, but I think I don't know, maybe, I just think it's something that speaks to his ability perhaps down the line as someone that is going to demand playoff minutes because of the shot and because he's just doing the right stuff defensively. Yeah,
I think that it probably, especially because he is a famous name with an NBA player father who was a former number one overall prospect, and now his calling card is as a shooter. So I think there is a little bit of underplayed. Just kind of the winning plays thing like you lay out there, especially because defensively is not great right now. But I think he does want to win. He's saying all the right things. Like, you tell he's a little nervous talking right now as he's coming in. And, most guys are. They're getting the new city, all that stuff. But what he keeps saying, and I think this is obviously, something that's easy to like, is that, he just wants to get started and wants to get to work and wants to win. And it's well, yeah, I mean, it's pretty easy to see that. But also the way he moves on offense off the ball is something that I think is an example of that, because it's not just the standstill shooting or even him just shooting in general. It's the fact that he is intentional with what he is doing in a way. And honestly, I'm sure he learned a lot of tricks of the trade to be an NBA player from his dad. I mean, that's part of it. It's certainly not a bad thing to have a dad who is an NBA player and also a guy who had to grind. Like, his dad was not a 5-star prospect. His dad was more of a grinder. So that probably helps you too in terms of just getting that that mindset together.
Yeah, and I would just say we've touched on a lot of different physical aspects of his game. You talked about kind of where he is at right now, getting ready to come in and be a part of the system in Atlanta. I would just say this, I gotta be, I was pretty fortunate. I mean, stuff was still weird because of the pandemic this year, but I still got to be around this team a lot. this team pulled like everyone on this roster. And again, it's not a bunch of nobodies waiting for their savior to come back. Like this is Paolo Banchero and Trevor Keels and Wendell Moore Jr., Mark Williams. They're all guys that were drafted in the top 45 last week. And they pulled like hell for him to get on the floor. And then they pulled like hell for him to be a part of the rotation. And then when he started becoming a thing for them this year, they celebrated him like crazy. Like go back and look at after the Louisville game or after the win in Chapel Hill, like when he was, a stud in both of those games, shooting the basketball, moving without the ball, like the way the team celebrated him, it's very obvious that like people like playing with AJ Griffin. He's like very easy to pull for, even if you're a teammate and that guy might come in and take some playing time or take some touches away from you. And maybe that the pros are not college or whatever, but I don't know. That was definitely like a part of the picture too, where like everyone was really, really pulling for AJ this season. Not just Duke fans, but guys on the team, coaching staff, players, etc. And so they were obviously very happy for him to be able to show just at least like a snapshot of how talented he is, because we didn't get to see it all this year, but certainly got to see the shooting touch, which is electric.
Yeah, no, I'm glad. That's part of the reason I wanted to talk to you, is that you have that on the ground knowledge that you can watch film and we can all watch the same film, but you would know that stuff from locally more often. The personality stuff, and also just it's quite a journey to basically not play for 2 years in terms of organized stuff, and then be at Duke under the spotlight when you were a 5-star and people expecting the world from you, and then you also have, as you mentioned at the very top of this discussion, an early injury even when he got there. So like there's just a lot of obstacles there. And if you are comfortable with the injury stuff in terms of just like putting it to the side, the overcoming that and working and being the grinder and getting back and doing all that stuff and sort of proving yourself and still being 18 with time to grow is a pretty enticing package. And like,
yeah,
I love the pick. I mean, we can wrap up, but I love the pick when it happened. I like it even more now that we've talked in this format, knowing all the stuff from behind the scenes. And you never know. The NBA draft is a inexact science. He might get hurt again. He might have issues or whatever. But I think at 16, it sounds like you agree. It sounds like a pretty easy pick in my mind. It was the guy that I would have taken with the intel that I have. But I really like the future of him.
I thought like we're not going to get into my full thoughts on what the Hornets did last week, but I would have been very happy with AJ Griffin at pick 13 to Charlotte. In fact, I would have been thrilled at the prospect of that. There's one last stat I'd like to read off with Griffin this season. You mentioned obviously you mentioned the insane shooting numbers, the synergy numbers, but Bart Torvik's site had Griffin down for 8 dunks this season. I would say I charted every Duke game, cut the film up, broke out all the possessions down, have stuff for every player on the roster. I have Griffin down with 9 dunks this season, 6 of which came off of cuts, 2 of which came in transition, and only 1 came in the half court as a pick and roll ball handler, which was at UNC on kind of like a little bit of like a broken play. I also have AJ down for 4 other what I would call dunk attempts, which he was either fouled in the act or he missed the dunk. All of those also came off of cuts, putback attempts, or in transition. So I've got to combine 13 dunks or dunk attempts for Griffin this season, combined with only 1 successful like live dribble in the half court. So again, like, one, he's very good moving without the ball, and he can be a very impactful finisher as a cutter, not just relocating for threes, but can cut to the rim and finish with some pop and some authority. But yeah, like as a driver, physically, like he's not quite there just yet. So anyways, that's some couple other numbers I wanted to spit out on Griffin while we were recording today.
Yeah, I mean, it's I find it all very interesting. I was candidly staring at a synergy profile for like an hour at one point, just like, oh, very good, excellent,
Yeah.
very good, very good. And that doesn't always tell you everything, but it's notable for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, feel free to add anything else if you want to. If not, I really appreciate all the time. And please plug what you got going. I know you're always diving on the ACC, but you also have NBA interests as well. So please tell people where they can find your work.
Yeah. We can find me on Twitter at bgeis_bird. Don't judge me off my Twitter handle. I made it when I was much younger and didn't know what Twitter was going to be, and I'm just sticking with it. So we're going for it.
Just roll with it at this point.
It's. I should have changed it probably like 5 years ago, but we're going with it now. But you can find me on Twitter there. You can find most of my work at ACCSports.com. At the top of the page, you'll see an ACC tab that says ACC Analytics, and a lot of scouting breakdowns. A lot of team breakdowns, examining where some off-season transfers who are coming into the ACC are gonna, how they might fit into their current system. So it's a lot of stats, it's a lot of film work. There's a lot of people doing that stuff for the NBA. There's maybe not quite as many with college. So a lot of those types of breakdowns there, and certainly like scouting profiles and of returning prospects or guys that are, getting set to enter the league. And then for anything Hornets related, if people are, trying to keep up with the team that's a little bit further up I-85, the Buzz Beat podcast, you can find that on Spotify, Apple, Stitcher, wherever you get podcasts, with me and my co-hosts Spencer, Richie, and Lee. We put out at least one episode a week. We've been doing a lot of stuff recently because of the coaching changes and the draft. But yeah, you can find stuff there and find that on Twitter at BuzzBeatPod if you're looking for scouting breakdowns. We'll be doing. I've got like a piece I'm working on Bryce McGowan, who the Hornets took in the second round. So, but anyways, those would be the main places to find me.
I recommend that for sure. Like I said at the beginning, I really did think of Brian immediately when I was talking people trying to talk about AJ Griffin, who would know him much better than I do. And I think we've all seen that that's definitely the case at this point. So thank you for coming on, my friend. I appreciate this. And if I can ever do anything for you, please don't hesitate to ask. As for everybody else, please subscribe to this podcast. Check out Brian's work across platforms, and we'll see you all next time.